Hello, my name is Miriam Ellman. I am the incoming executive director of a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. called the Academic Engagement Network. Today I'm here at the beautiful campus of Indiana University in Bloomington, where I and 6 other members of the Academic Engagement Network have come to participate, present papers, and deliver talks about contemporary anti-Semitism both on campus and off campus for the 4th National Conference of the Institute for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism, which is housed here at Indiana University. We've prepared short clips of the highlights of the various talks given by our AEN members. So we hope that you will watch these videos. We are concerned about rising anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic expression, the ostracism of Jewish students on college campuses, as well as various expressions of anti-Semitic, anti-Zionism in churches across America, in municipal spaces, and in other locations off campus. We hope that you will join us in our fight to combat campus anti-Semitism, to create a healthy and robust discussion of Israel on the American campus, and to increase our understanding of academic freedom and free speech and those bedrock values of the university system. Thank you very much.
I've concluded that the books and essays at stake are anti-Semitic for the following reasons that address common but not universal BDS views built into them. 1, they share with many BDS advocates a conviction that Zionism is racist at its core, despite the movement's historical transformation and complexity. 2, they believe the very idea of a Jewish state is illegitimate and that Israel thus has no right to exist. 3, they object to the founding of the Jewish state in 1948, not just to the military occupation of the West Bank. 4, they assert that normal relationships with any Israeli institutions or organizations that fail to condemn Israeli policy are unacceptable. 5, they dismiss the right 6.5 million Israeli Jews have to political self-determination. In addition, they embody a number of other views held by more devoted academic anti-Zionists that are not held by many others in the BDS movement. 1, that Israel is a fundamentally demonic, destructive, and anti-democratic country about which little or nothing positive can be said. 2, that Israel is perhaps the world's most extreme violator of human rights. 3, that there are no meaningful distinctions to be drawn between a given Israeli government and the Israeli people as a whole. 4, that distinctions about what is true or false can be set aside for purposes of political expediency. As a consequence, the publications tend to move beyond even strong political disagreement to cross a line into what often seems better understood as extreme hostility or hatred.
So, assumptions and questions, these are some of the things that I'm starting with. First of all, we know that the American Jewish community has shown varying interest in anti-Semitism on campus, really beginning after 1967, but for the most part, the phenomenon that I'm looking at is really since the start of the Second Intifada. And when they talked about anti-Semitism on campus, it was generally about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism emanating from the progressive left. However, especially since the 2016 election, which is something else that I'm assuming, anti-Semitism from the far right has started to consume more of the oxygen in that space. Now, don't get me wrong, the Jewish community obviously was always looking at anti-Semitism that emanates from the right, but it was perhaps more muted, and also very importantly, campus administrators know how to deal with and how to respond to, for the most part, a swastika on a building or something that emanates from the far right. They are often not as effective in dealing with Zionism is racism posters that emanate from the left. So perhaps for that reason, while the Jewish community and others could track it, they might not have been as consumed by it. However, I have 2 new questions given this different climate that we now have. And this is what I was thinking. What attributes, if any, does the far right share with the progressive left on campus? And beyond that, how does either this confluence or this disparity affect expressions of anti-Semitism on campus? And the reason why I want to look at it like that is because of the charge of this conference, which is how do we look forward, and rather than recording and documenting, which is part of the issue, how do we begin to formulate strategies to deal with these issues?
I've thought, maybe because I was a historian who dealt with anti-Semitism, it's better to be able to talk directly to people about what anti-Semitism is and give them the tools to understand themselves when they see it, how to fit it into a larger history, which is basically what historians do when they teach about anti-Semitism. So I've worked with a definition that goes like this, that above all, anti-Semitism is an animus, a hate. It's based on an idea or a portrait of the Jew. I'll return to the phrase portrait of the Jew. And that idea or portrait of the Jew is a negative being in the fullest sense of the word, an extraordinarily malevolent and powerful being, a threat, a danger, a counter to everything that's good. Now, if you can work with a definition like that and ask people to respond to claims that are made on campus, or people who come on campus bringing anti-Semitic messages, I think it's better in terms of having them understand fully what they're dealing with. 50 years ago, the Tunisian-born Jew Albert Memmi, who was famous for writing about the colonizer and the colonized, as well as about his own Jewish self, insisted that the Jew is a figure of misfortune. What is Jewish history, he wrote in Portrait of a Jew, but a continual alert punctuated by ghastly catastrophes? Jews face a hostility, he wrote, which keeps them apart, separates them, and crucially shapes their relations with others. I think this is a significant insight into what's happening on campus now.
So Alvin wanted me to speak about Jewish Voice for Peace today. Most of you are probably somewhat familiar with this organization, so I wanted to start by sharing an incident that you may not know about, and that includes people who think they know a lot about JVP. So I'm going to take you back to November of 2015, and on an evening in November then, about 4 years ago, Al-Auda, which is the Palestinian Right to Return Coalition, proudly announced on social media platforms that it had co-hosted, along with the Cleveland chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace, an event featuring Alison Weir and promoting her work. In staking out this position, JVP's leaders and activists repeatedly insist that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, and they situate themselves as victims of baseless charges of anti-Semitism. In this vein, JVP's book on anti-Semitism includes no authors who actually have any expertise on anti-Semitism. Instead, the book gives voice to people like Linda Sarsour and BDS co-founder Omar Barghouti, who both have chapters in the book. It aims to give voice to those who are marginalized by supposedly false allegations of bias. Put all together, JVP works to discredit Jewish concerns about anti-Semitism, casting them instead as a deceitful conspiracy to censor legitimate discourse and debate. It's not merely that Jews are mistaken when they raise the issue of anti-Semitism on the left, or that they're oversensitive to it. They are simply lying, according to JVP. In terms of its activism, JVP works with various marginalized groups. While it relegates Jews to the background of intersectional discourse, it conceptualizes Jews as white and thus deemed as having no relevant concerns in intersectional spaces. In other words, JVP thinks that Jews need to sit back and listen.
Back in 1993, two prominent scholars of Judaism, the brothers Daniel and Jonathan Boyarin, published what might be called a diasporic manifesto, which set out to prove the incompatibility of Zionism with Judaism. The brothers argued that the Zionist solution to the Jewish question, a Jewish state, is, quote, a subversion of Jewish culture and not its culmination, unquote. While they argued that we are not comparing Israel to the Nazis, which is kind of grand of them, the brothers claimed that there was, quote, a yet unrealized but necessary theoretical compatibility between Zionist ideology and the fascism of state ethnicity, unquote. The authors maintain, quote, the only moral path for Jews would be the renunciation of Jewish hegemony qua Jewish hegemony. Either Israel must entirely divest itself of the language of race and become truly a state that is equally for all of its citizens and collectives, or the Jews must divest themselves, a very interesting verb of course, must divest themselves of their claim to space, unquote. Furthermore, the authors suggest that the Israeli Declaration of Independence, which starts off with, Jewish narrative that the Jewish people, emerged in the land of Israel, created imaginary autochthony, imaginary indigeneity of Jews to the land of Israel. And instead, the Boyarin brothers put forward their version of how Judaism was, quote, lived for 2,000 years, and that the Jewish story begins with a people forever unconnected with a particular land, a people that calls into question the idea that a people must have a land in order to be a people.
The two images that are up here on the screen, I'm glad we can see them clearly here. There are going to be a bunch of other images. The two images up here on the screen represent what I would argue are the past and the present of anti-Semitism. The first depicts Adolf Hitler, the Western world's champion of Jew hatred, as portrayed by the major Nazi-era painter Heinrich Kneer in the year 1937. The second, on the right, is less well known, but no less ominous. Pepe the Frog, as he is called, is an internet meme that has recently become the de facto swastika of today's extremist movement known as the alt-right. The two images can be compared in all kinds of ways, needless to say, but one issue worth noting is their relative impact. Kneer's portrait of Hitler on the left employed the traditional medium of painting and was famously displayed at the Great German Art Exhibition of 1937 in Munich, where it was seen by approximately 500,000 visitors. By contrast, the image of Pepe the Frog on the right was created anonymously with computer-based graphic design software that has probably been seen by millions, maybe even tens of millions, of web users online. This particular image's vastly greater reach shows the radical potential that new digital technologies, I argue, can have on the oldest hatred. Now, many of us here today probably have a general familiarity with the two phenomena that appear in my paper's title. Scholars, however, have only recently begun to subject them to sustained analysis. Today, in my brief 20 minutes, I intend to examine digital anti-Semitism and the alt-right from a broader historical perspective in order to determine their respective novelty. So I can preview two questions, perhaps. To what degree, on the one hand, does the so-called alt-right differ from the traditional far-right? And second of all, to what degree does its digital dissemination of Jew hatred differ from previous expressions of anti-Semitism? In the end, though, the only effective way to address anti-Semitism is to attack it at its source. And while there may be no eradicating it, historians have long understood that anti-Semitism rises and falls as societies enter into and emerge out of crisis. One doesn't need to be a purely materialist historian to recognize that if anti-Semitism is an expression of deeper resentments and feeds off of those resentments, the only way of weakening the former is by denying people the latter. Thank you very much.